So being able to communicate professionally really starts with a tremendous self-awareness. And that's what we're going to dive into in this video, really talking about understanding ourselves, how we perceive ourselves, how others perceive us. Because in order for us to communicate our messages effectively in a professional manner, to get the responses and to ultimately get the persuasion of outcomes that we're likely seeking, we have to have a really good understanding of ourselves. So let's dive right in. Let's have a little fun to open this one up, a little icebreaker. I want you to think about your communication style. Let's start to awaken that sense of self. If I were to ask you to identify your style of communication as a specific digital or social media channel, which one would you select? Do you feel like you're Facebook, where you're really well connected and you love to like and comment on everybody's things? Maybe you have a really wide array of audiences that you interact with. Maybe you're a planner, and so you love using Facebook events to get people to go to things. Maybe a little bit more like Reddit, right? You're somebody who wants to be able to comment and write a lot of detail on a lot of topics. When you tell stories, they're long and they have a lot of information, and you can tell stories on a wide array of topics. Maybe a little bit like Twitter, right? 140 characters, short, sweet, to the point. You're very news oriented. You like to give very specific updates as to what's going on with you. But if people want to elaborate or find out more, they're really going to have to dig in and do some searching. So take a moment and kind of reflect on this, right? Like, how would you characterize your communication style? And this helps us to begin that journey of deep reflection of how it is that we see ourselves, because how we see ourselves, as always, influences how we act and behave, which then, of course, is going to impact how others perceive us, which in a very cyclical manner will come back and influence how we see ourselves. So be interested to see what it was that you came up with for your specific style. So as I've mentioned, to understand ourselves is to understand others and vice versa. I love this cartoon. I think it's truly representative of the concept at play today. Here we have a mirror being held up by others. And so the person looking in the mirror is seeing themselves, but they're seeing themselves through someone else's mirror, through someone else's vision. So we're really kind of onboarding not just how we see ourselves, but how we see ourselves through the eyes and the lives and the perspectives of others. So let's dive right in and talk a little bit about what this self-concept is truly made up of. So you have your own self-schemas, right? These are the things in which you know about yourself. These are the mental models, the characterizations that you have of yourself. And as we'll learn as we go through this process, those self-schemas have been influenced by how others have treated or acted towards you in a variety of settings throughout the course of your life. That's how you know certain things about yourself. Then, of course, you have your past and your present self, the things that you've done and are currently doing. They make up part of what your overall self-concept is. When we think about storytelling, right, we think about those ands and those buts. That's the past and the present self coming together. And then, of course, you have your future self. So your values, your ikigais, the things that you're seeking in this world, how you want to live your life, they're influencing your overall self-concept as well. And so they all come together and they make up that self-concept. Now, self-awareness is the process of evaluating oneself through this introspective and social interaction look. So your self-concept is always evolving, and it really is being impacted and advanced by your self-awareness. And so self-awareness, therefore, should be consistently processed at all times, right? You're onboarding the information that you're receiving from those around you, and it should be making tiny little adjustments to your self-concept based on whether or not the interactions that you're having are resulting in the way that you wanted them to. If you're getting the outcomes, if people are meeting or exceeding your expectations when you're engaging with them, then likely it's having subtle little influences on your self-concept to keep doing those things. But when we don't have success, right, when things don't go the way that we have planned or they don't meet our expectations, you might have to make rather more significant changes to your self-concept, and in some ways changing and manifesting how you behave and think about yourself to try to get the outcomes that we want. And of course, the biggest challenge with communication, as you well know, is that audiences are always changing. So something that you do that might work really well for certain audiences may not for others. And that's why the self-awareness process needs to be continuous, because literally as you change rooms, as you change audiences and the channels in which you're interacting with, your self-awareness is going to be what helps you to navigate and to make those small or sometimes significant adjustments in how you're behaving. And so really what we want to think about here is that your self-awareness, of who it is that you're interacting with and how they're seeing and perceiving and feeling towards you, your ability to make adjustments based on that are ultimately what will allow you to be a relatively effective communicator. And that is, of course, typically the goal that we have in almost all of our interactions. Okay, let's break this up even further and let's talk a little bit about internal versus external self-awareness. So internal, those ikigai components, those values, those passions, those inspirations that we have within ourselves, along with our feelings, the emotions that we have inside of us. And one of the things that we know, right, is that if you are very sensitive to those things existing inside of you, typically you'll be able to proceed through life with a relatively higher job satisfaction and relationship satisfaction, likely attributed to the fact that you're able to adjust accordingly. You're in tune with your internal self-awareness, and therefore you're hopefully making decisions outwardly that are allowing you to feel balanced in terms of whatever it is that you need in that moment. So we want to maintain a high degree of internal self-awareness whenever possible. It typically protects us, and it protects us from ourselves even at times when we know we're feeling certain ways and we're taking actions to avoid or to try to change those feelings in some ways. On the other hand, we have external self-awareness. And this is this piece about audiences. This is this piece about understanding how others are viewing us. How do they perceive our values, our passions, and aspirations? Okay, so you could have 100% agreement or 0% agreement or somewhere in between what your internal feelings and sensations are and what somebody is perceiving your internal beliefs or values or passions or sensations are. And we've had this happen to us all the time, right? You've had people come up to you and ask if you're overly happy or overly sad based on, the look on your face or how you're moving or talking or acting, and it may or may not be accurate. And when it's accurate, you really appreciate it, right? Because it means that they were in tune with you and you're thinking, okay, somebody's feeling me. They know where I'm at. But when it's not in tune, when it's wrong, when they've made a judgment that's incorrect, we're really frustrated by that. And a lot of times we get frustrated with the audience member, we get frustrated with the person who attributed the wrong feelings. But if you just take a moment to reflect on that for a second, who is really responsible? Now, you could say that it's the person that had the misperception, but in some ways, that would be negating your self-awareness responsibility. Your self-awareness being constantly in check and something that you're always working on as a professional means that you have to be sensitive to how you believe that person is perceiving you. And if you don't want that misguided perception, then your self-awareness needs to be in such a way that's allowing you to be sensitive and to making sure that you're not sending those signals so that they're not being picked up in this manner. And that's tricky and it's challenging and it's incredibly hard because as human beings, we typically only have so much capacity to be able to control all of those things. But what we know and what I've experienced in working with people is that the more effort and energy that you put into training your self-awareness, right? The more intentional your self-awareness becomes, the more sensitive you can become in terms of your external self-awareness. And you can avoid more and more of these situations where folks in your audiences are not perceiving your internal self in an accurate fashion. So if that happens to you a lot, then this is something that you're really going to want to pay attention to. And if you want to be a master of communication, a tremendous leader, then you're going to want to continue to work on this throughout the course of your career. So one of the ways that we can do that is by taking these deep and intentional self-reflections. And so here, right, we have a slide that is designed to help you just think critically about a few major traits or components that likely external audiences are perceiving about you in any given moment, right? From your appearance to maybe your talents to your social roles. These are all factors, characteristics, traits that as we move throughout the world and as we interact with others, we're able to pick up on these pieces for them. Now, whether or not they're accurate, right, probably comes down to two factors. Is the person that you're interacting with, are they giving you enough information to make an accurate assessment? And am I, as a receiver of information, am I listening? Am I attuned to all the little pieces of information that I'm getting? And again, professional communication is to have the highest degree and ability in this area to have great accuracy with which we're not only sending information, but with which we're decoding and asserting that information to others. So as you go through this chart, this list, you would, of course, first begin by filling it out for yourself. So you start at the top, your appearance. What are the characteristics? What are the descriptors that stand out to you most about your appearance, about yourself? Now, you may place yourself in a professional setting if that helps for any of these as you work through this. But what would you write down? What about your social traits, right? Are you friendly? Are you shy? Are you funny? Are you a center of attention? Are you a goofball? Are you thoughtful? Are you reserved? As you move down to talents, right? What are the things that you would attribute to your talents, right? Are you a problem solver? Are you somebody who desires peace and therefore you're a peacemaker? Your intellectual capacity, right? How is it that you go about solving problems? How is it that you approach the world, right? What way is your mind programmed? What about your strong beliefs, right? So by interacting with you, can I get a sense of how important family is to you, or your health is to you, or your finances are to you, or your community is to you, or your religion is to you? And then lastly, your social roles. Your social roles, we like to think about, do you associate yourself as being predominantly a son or a daughter or a friend, a neighbor, a roommate, a father, a mother, an aunt, an uncle, a sister, a brother? These roles, we know they have associations with them. We know that we associate certain characteristics and adjectives to various social roles throughout the course of our various cultures. And so what roles do you think you're sending out when you're interacting with others? And how are they perceiving that as part of your larger person, as part of your larger value system? So take a moment to pause here and to reflect and to write down some answers to these, because what would happen now would be you'd want to take this list out into the world with you, relatively speaking, and you'd go forward. And if you were to stop and pause and ask those around you, right? Do you think this about me? Do you feel this? Is this accurate? Is this true? Or they were to write down their own descriptors, what degree of alignment would take place? And the higher the degree of alignment, at least with that audience, at least with that person, you're sending and receiving and coding and decoding in a self-aware manner. And if other audiences were not able to detect that, maybe it's cultural differences, or maybe it is the value of communication that you share, and the two parties involved are not focusing in and listening to the same things that are going on. So that's why reflection and debriefing is an important part of this self-awareness process. And this all comes into play because in a professional manner, you want to be going through this process on a continuous basis. You really want to have a heightened sense of awareness, especially when the stakes are raised, whether it's applying for a job, whether it's going up for a promotion, whether it's dealing with certain types of clients, et cetera. If you want to be an exceptional communicator, it really does begin with a great sense of self-awareness. Okay. Let's kind of wrap and conclude on this concept of uncertainty reduction. What are we trying to do? Ultimately, we could embrace all of this in the theory of uncertainty reduction. As human beings, we have an innate desire to reduce uncertainty. We don't like not knowing certain things. It's dangerous to us, right? We were programmed, right, as animals to go out into environments and to immediately reduce uncertainty using our senses so that we could protect ourselves. Well, the same is relatively true today. And while we're not probably hunting and gathering for our food per se, we are hunting and gathering, right, for our networks and our connections and our friends and our partners and our mates. And as we interact with others, we're trying to reduce uncertainty. We're asking ourselves, is this person safe? Are they trustworthy? Are they credible? Do they have knowledge? Do they have experience? Are they worth paying? Are they worth working and living with? So this is why storytelling is an important part of professional communication. This is why self-awareness is an important part, because you have to be sending the right signals to those in which you work with, to those in which you live and play with, right? Those people in your lives. You want them to reduce uncertainty in an accurate way so that they're interacting and engaging with you as efficiently as they can. So let's round this off with a little activity. And this activity is first, last, best, worst, because you may be saying, okay, Roy, self-awareness is important. And I really do want to send those right signals. And I do want to code who I am effectively. How can I go about doing that without just walking around my environments, handing out sheets and saying, this is who I am, or asking people explicitly what they think of me? And I've always believed that story is probably the easiest, quickest, and in some ways most organic manner in which you can share this information. And you can do so in a way that it just weaves into your daily conversation. Just very simple moments where you can tell short little anecdotes, but they actually tell me a lot about who you are. They tell me a lot about your values. They tell me a lot about where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. So first, last, best, worst is this idea that you can quickly identify stories. So one of the problems that folks will have as they begin this professional communication journey, and when we place such an emphasis on storytelling, is they're like, I love the idea. I don't know. I don't have stories. I don't know what to tell. And so usually coming up with your first or your last or your best or your worst of anything is a little bit more accessible. And as you go through this activity, you begin to realize that as you kind of label your first and your last and your best and your worst, you can extract some story piece from it. And you can learn something from it, right? And I tell the story of my very first job working at Sears as a retail associate, working in the men's department during Christmas time. Sears and Roebuck was, a store where they sold all sorts of goods. And I worked in the men's department. And people would come through and they would just terrorize the racks of clothes and just lay things all over the place and on the ground. And it wasn't really a lot of fun. It was actually a very frustrating and relatively stressful job. And of course, the Christmas soundtrack is playing nonstop the entire time you're at work. So that drives you a little bit crazy. And the thing that I learned from it, right, and I'll tell this story in this manner, is it's the reason why when I go out into retail shops or I go out into any type of hospitality, that I really try to go out of my way to be as nice and friendly, as kind to the associates as the best of my ability, because I remember being in those positions. And I remember how good it would feel when somebody treated me with respect, or they were really appreciative of my service. And so I really try to make sure that I do that. Now I can tell that story, and I can use my little anecdote about my first ever job working at Sears in the men's department at Christmas time, and how troubling it was to just deal and interact with the public for the first time as a 16-year-old kid. And what I learned was how important it was to treat others that are in those similar positions. And I tell that story, and I think it gives you some insight into my character a little bit, right? So I'm using my personal experiences to influence how I go out and engage and to think about the world. I can go through these now, and I can use each of my little anecdotes to try to tell you something about my character, tell you something about my value system. And instead of me coming out and saying that I have a high degree of respect for how we treat one another, especially in professional engagements, right? I don't have to say that. I can just tell you the story. And I can hope that to some degree you can extract that story as an audience member. So what I want to do is I leave you with this, and feel free to pause and to write these down and to start working on them, but start thinking about the anecdotes and the stories that you can tell that capture and share a little bit about who you are and what your value systems are. You don't have to always have this big elaborate story or have concocted some PowerPoint presentation, but just those little answers. How you doing today? What'd you get up to this weekend? What are you hoping you're going to achieve in the next few months? Those opportunities come out oftentimes a few times a day, and we're missing opportunities to answer those questions in ways that really influence how others see us. So start to use the storytelling method, start to use your self-awareness to start to influence in a professional manner how others see you, so that you're more in line with their perceptions and vice versa. So good luck and enjoy the opportunity.